At my wife's sister's wedding, I was stopped by a security guard and denied entry. Your name is not on the list, he said coldly. I saw my wife and her mother watching and laughing from a distance, but I said nothing and left. The next day, they came to me in tears, begging for help for a reason I never could have expected. Jonas, you have to help us, my wife Ava said the morning after her sister's wedding. Her mother, Rosalind, was with her, visibly shaken. Why would I help you? I asked. Because Celia is missing, she said, voice trembling. I stared at them, still numb from the humiliation they'd orchestrated. And then Ava said something that changed everything. She tried to contact you before she disappeared. The day before had been surreal. I drove nearly 7 hours from San Diego to Napa Valley, arriving early for the wedding of Celia, my sister-in-law. My wife Ava was the maid of honor. We'd been married for 7 years. While things between us had become tense lately, I didn't expect what happened next. The venue was one of those sprawling vineyards just outside Yountville pristine hills, lanterns hanging from trees, everything tailored to impress. I walked up to the entrance with a gift bag in hand, dressed in the suit Ava picked out for me weeks earlier. At the gate stood a security guard holding a tablet. Name? He asked, barely glancing at me. Jonas Walden. He typed, squinted, and frowned. You're not on the list. I laughed a little. You're joking, right? I'm the bride's brother-in-law. My wife, the maid of honor. He shrugged, tone firm. Sorry, you'll have to step aside. Confused, I looked around, and that's when I saw them. Ava and Rosalind, standing maybe 20 feet away, sipping champagne, their expressions smug. Rosalind was laughing openly. Ava was smirking behind her glass, making no effort to come over or help. No gesture, no panic, nothing. I made eye contact with Ava, hoping for a sign that this was some mistake, that she'd fix it. But she just turned away like she didn't know me. I stood there for another 30 seconds, heart in my throat, then turned and walked back to my car without a word. No confrontation, no scene, just silence. The drive back to my Airbnb in nearby St. Helena was a blur. That night, I didn't sleep. My phone never rang. Not from Ava. Not from anyone. Then morning came. And with it, Ava and Rosalind on my doorstep. Ava looked like she hadn't slept either. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were red. Rosalind's usual sharpness was gone. She was pale, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Jonas, please. You have to help us, Ava said. I stared at her. You humiliated me. Why would I help you? Celia is missing, she said. That stopped me. I let them in, though every fiber of me screamed to slam the door. They sat in my living room like lost children. I stayed standing. She was last seen last night, just after the reception. No one knows where she went. Her purse and phone were found by the back gate, Ava explained. And? I asked, barely keeping the anger from my voice. She tried contacting you. Ava pulled out her phone and showed me the message, 11:43 p.m. Jonas was right. I need to talk to him. He's the only one who saw it. I hadn't received it. No missed call. No text. But I knew what she meant. 2 nights before the wedding, I had gone for a walk behind the guest cottages near the vineyard. I overheard Jacob Celia's fiancé arguing with someone on the phone. He was angry, loud, and mentioned something about burying the story before the IPO. I didn't know what he meant, and, honestly, I didn't want to get involved. It felt like private business. But Celia must have found out something serious. I agreed to help. Not because I wanted to save Ava or Rosalind, I did it for Celia. She had always been decent to me. Polite. Kind. Even when her mother and sister were smug or dismissive. I started asking around. Called a few people I'd met at the rehearsal dinner. One guy, Jordan, a business associate of Jacob, said, off the record, that Jacob had been under investigation for fraud before. The kind of stuff that gets buried with NDAs and payouts. He warned me. If Celia found something, Jacob wouldn't take that lightly. Not now. We took all of this to the police, who were already involved. At first, they didn't have much to go on. No footage. No confirmed last sighting. But then Celia's car was found abandoned near a disused barn 6 miles away, hidden behind overgrown trees. The passenger door was open. Inside was a camera bag and a note. She had fled. 3 hours later, they found her hiding in an old horse stable nearby, cold and scared but unharmed. When she saw me, she ran into my arms and sobbed. She said Jacob had shoved her during an argument after she confronted him about financial documents she stumbled upon while printing wedding invitations. He'd been falsifying reports to inflate his company's value before a major investor meeting. She wanted to call it off. He told her that if she ruined the wedding, she'd regret it. That no one would believe her. So she left, scared for her safety. Everything came undone after that. Jacob was arrested and charged with fraud and violence. The wedding was null. Investors pulled out. Celia cut ties with almost everyone, including Ava and Rosalind, and moved to Portland to start over. As for Ava, she came back a few weeks later to talk. She said she had been manipulated. That Rosalind convinced her I would ruin the family's image if I showed up. That she didn't realize it would go that far. That she was sorry. But sorry didn't mean much after watching her laugh while I stood alone. I filed for separation. She didn't contest it. Now I live in Monterey, back to basics. Smaller projects, a quiet apartment, and weekends spent hiking or reading far from the designer dresses and vineyard weddings. People often ask me why I didn't cause a scene. Why didn't I yell at the guard, or Ava, or demand answers right then? But sometimes the deepest betrayals aren't loud. They're quiet, public, carried out with a smile and a champagne flute in hand. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't fury, it's walking away and letting the truth catch up on its own. The sun was just beginning to set when we pulled into the local sheriff's station. Celia sat beside me in the car, wrapped in a blanket one of the deputies had given her. She hadn't stopped shaking, though she kept saying she was fine. That's the thing about trauma, it doesn't announce itself in screams or sobs. Sometimes it just settles into your bones and makes everything feel distant. She gave her statement. Calmly, carefully. The officers took it seriously. Unlike what I expected, they didn't dismiss her or pressure her to rethink anything. Maybe the evidence, the bruises on her wrist, the financial files she had taken pictures of before running, the witness statements helped push things along. Ava and Rosalind showed up at the station a few hours later. I could hear their voices in the hallway, sharp and panicked. When they saw Celia, Rosalind immediately started crying, arms outstretched. Baby, thank God. Celia stepped back. I'm okay, she said, but I need space. From all of you. Ava tried to speak next, but Celia just looked at her, then at me. She didn't say anything, but her gaze lingered. Later, as the officers processed Jacob, Ava approached me outside. Jonas, she said. Her voice was quieter than I'd heard in months. I don't know how to say this. I waited. I messed up. I should have stopped it at the gate. I let Mom. She cut herself off, frustrated. It wasn't just the gate, I said, not angry, just tired. It was everything before that. All the little things. The way you stood there and laughed. Like I wasn't a person. Like we hadn't built a life together. Ava looked down, twisting the wedding band on her finger. I thought I was protecting the family, she said. You protected an image, I said. Not the people in it. We stood there for a long time. The station buzzed behind us, people coming in, filing reports, answering phones. But between us, there was only quiet. Rosalind walked past at one point, still red-eyed. She didn't even look at me. I didn't mind. The next few days blurred together. There were statements, legal filings, early media coverage about the startup Jacob co-founded imploding under scrutiny. The fraud wasn't just theoretical, there were real investors, real families, real people who were about to be duped out of millions. Celia's evidence cracked it open. The documents she found and quietly photographed were time-stamped and damning. There was no way to spin them. She stayed with a friend for a while before leaving town altogether. She told me she was going to Portland, maybe open a small studio, do something with her photography for once instead of hiding it as a hobby. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, she said. I drove her to the airport the morning she left. As we waited for her flight, we sat quietly with paper cups of coffee between us. You were the only one who ever saw through the noise, she said. Even when I didn't want to admit it. I smiled, but I didn't have the words to respond. That's the strange thing about being right. It doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels heavy. I stayed a few more weeks in Napa after that. I told work I needed time off. Didn't go back to San Diego. I didn't even tell Ava where I was staying. She sent a few texts. Long ones. The kind where every word feels like it's reaching out with desperate fingers trying to hold on to something that's already gone. I didn't answer right away. What do you even say when someone betrays you so slowly that you don't realize it, until one day they're laughing while you're locked out of your own life? I spent a lot of time walking through the vineyards early in the morning. There's a quiet out there, a kind of silence that makes everything else feel smaller. I'd sit on a bench overlooking the rows of vines and try to piece things together in my head. How did we get here? Ava wasn't always like that. When we first met, she was different. Thoughtful. Warm. She used to surprise me with little notes in my work bag. She'd call just to hear my voice. And her laugh, it used to light up a room. But somewhere along the way, she started changing. It wasn't overnight. It was a slow drift. Her mom's influence was always present, subtle, but sharp. Rosalind had a way of dressing up cruelty in etiquette. Every comment was laced with a smile. Every insult wrapped in concern. I think Ava began to adopt it without realizing it. And I let it happen, thinking I could pull her back. Thinking love was enough to keep her grounded. But love isn't enough when one person's holding it while the others climb over it. So I stopped trying to hold on. And still, part of me couldn't help but wonder what she'd say if I gave her a chance to explain. What could she possibly say that would make standing outside that gate worth it? I didn't have the answer yet, but I had time. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a rush to get it. A week passed. I returned to San Diego, not to my home, but to a short-term rental near Mission Hills. The kind of place that still had the smell of fresh paint and generic hotel artwork on the walls. My name was still on the lease back at our apartment, but I couldn't bring myself to go back there. Everything in that space was a museum of something that didn't exist anymore. Ava texted me again. then called. I didn't answer at first. The silence was doing something I hadn't expected. It was giving me clarity. But one afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop on Washington Street, I picked up. Jonas. Her voice was soft, like she didn't expect me to answer. Yeah, I said. I didn't add anything. Can we talk? She asked. In person? I hesitated, then said, all right. We met in Balboa Park, near the koi pond, where we used to go early in our relationship. There was something symbolic about it, even if unspoken, revisiting the beginning, now with all the weight of the end. Ava looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe just less certain. Her clothes were plain. No designer heels, no perfectly manicured nails. Just jeans, a hoodie, and a woman who looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. She sat beside me on the bench. I owe you more than an apology, she began. I said nothing. I was ashamed, not of you, of myself, of how small I let myself become around Mom, around that whole image we built. You could have said something, I replied quietly. I know, she whispered, but I didn't want to lose what I thought we had. The version of me I thought I needed to be to fit into that world. And where did that leave me? I asked. She didn't answer. For a while we sat in silence, just watching the water. Kids ran past us, laughing. An older couple sat nearby, feeding breadcrumbs to birds. Life, uninterested in our drama, kept moving. I remember when we used to come here and talk about the house we'd build one day, she said suddenly. You wanted a wraparound porch. I wanted the kitchen window to face the sunrise. That was a long time ago, I said. Yeah, but it still meant something. She looked at me then. There was no makeup hiding the exhaustion, the regret. I miss you, Jonas. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself too. She wiped at her eye, exhaled. I know you don't owe me anything. Not a second chance. Not a conversation. Not even this. But I needed you to hear me say I'm sorry. Really sorry. For letting you stand alone. For laughing. I wasn't just your husband, I said. I was your partner. Your friend. You didn't just betray me at that gate. You erased me. In front of your whole family. I know, she said, voice breaking. And now that the image fell apart, suddenly I matter again. She shook her head. You always mattered. I was just too cowardly to show it. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there until the sun started to dip behind the trees. When we stood, she didn't ask what came next. She just said thank you and walked away. I stood there long after she left. Because even though she'd finally said all the things I had once begged to hear, it didn't erase the silence when I needed her most. It didn't undo the smirk. The champagne glass. The shoulder turned cold. I didn't hate her, but I didn't love her the same way anymore either. That kind of trust, once broken like that, doesn't regrow in the same soil. Over the following weeks, I started pulling pieces of my life together again. I went back to work, but scaled down. Took fewer clients. Said no more often. I started having breakfast at this little diner near Point Loma, where the same old guy played chess on the patio every morning. Sometimes we'd talk about nothing at all. Sometimes that was exactly what I needed. Celia and I kept in touch. She sent me a photo from her new apartment in Portland. It was small, filled with natural light, and in the background was a wall covered in her prints. She looked free. We didn't talk much about Ava, or Rosalind, or what happened, but in some ways, it was the only thing we ever really did talk about. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. It was from Rosalind. The envelope was thin. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper. No apology. No excuse. Just a note. You were right. That's all. No signature. I sat there looking at it for a long time. Not because it changed anything, but because even someone like her, in her own cold, quiet way, knew what she had done. And that's the thing about people like her. They don't often say sorry. But when the consequences come, they feel them more deeply than they let on. I folded the note once, then twice, and tucked it into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. By that point, the version of me that had stood at that wedding gate confused, heart in his throat, felt like a stranger. Like someone I had once known, but outgrown. And yet, his silence still echoed with meaning. I didn't reach out to Ava again. After the bench conversation in Balboa Park, I think we both understood that the current between us had shifted. She didn't ask for another meeting. I didn't block her, either. The silence between us wasn't hostile, it just felt final. Like we both knew there was nothing more we could say that would change what had already happened. And so I settled into this strange, muted version of life. Not empty, but subdued. Like the volume had been turned down just enough for me to hear myself think again. Work remained steady. I kept mostly to myself. My co-workers, probably sensing something, gave me space. One of them, Leah, started inviting me to grab coffee now and then. Nothing serious. She was funny, sharp, divorced with a teenage son and a dog she spoke of like a roommate. I liked her company. It felt safe. Uncomplicated. But I wasn't ready to move forward like that. Not yet. The divorce paperwork showed up one Thursday morning. I hadn't asked for it. Ava had. Served with quiet efficiency, as if she was still trying to make things neat, tidy, and painless. It wasn't painful exactly. It just felt strange. 7 years, reduced to 15 pages in a manila envelope. I sat with it unopened for a day and a half before signing it. No alimony. No drama. We had no kids, no shared property. Just two people walking away from what had once been real, now hollow. I mailed it back without ceremony. A few nights later, I ended up at a local bar I used to go to before I met Ava. Nothing fancy, dark wood, dim lights, an old jukebox that played everything from Sinatra to early 2000s rock. The bartender, Dean, recognized me. "Damn, man. It's been 10 years, he said. 7, I said. Close enough. He poured me the usual without asking. A whiskey, 2 fingers. I sipped it slowly, watching people trickle in. First dates, old friends, office coworkers blowing off steam. All of it is familiar. All of it distant. Somewhere near the back of the bar, a group was arguing about relationships loudly. Something about betrayal, forgiveness, and if they come back, do they really deserve you? I tuned them out. Later, walking back to my place under a hazy coastal sky, I realized something. I didn't feel broken anymore. I wasn't whole, but I wasn't crumbling either. I was simply existing, learning how to move through the world again without bracing for a collapse. One afternoon, Celia called me out of the blue. "Just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I finally set up the gallery I talked about. Just a little one, nothing big. But it's mine." "That's amazing," I said, smiling into the phone. "I'm proud of you." "You know," she added, "I think part of why I'm here is because of what happened. Because of you. If I'd gone through with the wedding, I'd be living in someone else's script. Now I get to write my own." She paused for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever think about what could have been different?" I thought about it. About Ava. About Rosalind. About the long, slow erosion of trust. "Sometimes," I said, "but mostly I think about what I learned." We talked for another 20 minutes. When we hung up, I stared at my phone for a while. It was strange, feeling so connected to someone who had once been so peripheral in my life. Celia and I hadn't become best friends or anything like that, but the bond we shared was real. Born not out of blood or marriage, but survival. Truth. Meanwhile, Ava was a ghost. I knew from a mutual friend that she'd moved out of our apartment. That Rosalind had gone low profile after the Jacob impropriety made headlines. Her social media went silent. She didn't show up at the usual charity galas. Apparently, even her friends started pulling away. I guess reputations are easier to decorate than rebuild. Months passed. I stopped counting. Life didn't snap back into place, but it kept unfolding. Bit by bit, like a film developing in slow motion. I found joy in quiet things. Morning walks. A really good cup of coffee. Repainting an old bookshelf I'd been meaning to fix since 2019. One Saturday, I found myself driving up to Julian, that sleepy mountain town east of San Diego, known mostly for its pies and crisp air. I stayed in a tiny cabin, read 2 books in one weekend, and fell asleep to the sound of wind through trees. That trip did something to me. It reminded me of who I was before I became someone else's accessory. Before I let myself shrink. Before I stood outside that vineyard gate and realized the person I loved was capable of cruelty and worse, apathy. It didn't make me bitter, but it made me honest. About myself. About others. About what love really means when the music fades, when the crowds thin out, when there's no one left to perform for. Love without loyalty is just pageantry. Ava had mastered the performance. I had just been on the stage. A year passed. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I received a letter, not email, not a text, an actual letter with elegant handwriting on the envelope. No return address, but I recognized the writing immediately. Ava. I stood at the kitchen counter, turning it over in my hands. Part of me didn't want to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. I slit the top with a butter blade and pulled out 2 pages of stationery. The letter wasn't long. She wrote that she had moved to Austin, that she was working part-time at a nonprofit, trying to redefine who she was. She didn't say much about Rosalind, only that their relationship was strained. She talked about therapy, regret, growth. Then she said something that made me pause. "There's a gala next month in San Diego. It's for a housing initiative you used to support. I know it's not my place to ask, but I'll be attending. I'd like to see you. Just to talk. No expectations." I read it twice. Then I smiled, not because I was moved, but because of what I'd already done. You see, Ava didn't know I had rejoined the board of that same housing initiative 6 months earlier. I'd helped them land a sizable grant through an old contact and had been quietly working behind the scenes on several projects. I wasn't the guy pouring champagne in front of cameras anymore. I was the guy making sure the roofs were built right and people had a safe place to call home. So yes, I was already attending. And yes, I had invited someone. Leah. Not romantically. Not yet. But we had become good friends over the last year, and our connection had deepened into something warm, easy, and real. When I told her about the gala, she agreed to go as my +1. "Only if there's wine," she joked. "And dessert." When the night arrived, I wore a navy suit, tailored, simple. I didn't try to outshine anyone. I just wanted to feel like myself. Leah looked radiant in a soft burgundy dress. Not flashy, just elegant. Confidence. The event was held at a restored arts center downtown. Dim lights, string quartet in the background, laughter echoing off marble. It was the kind of event Ava used to thrive in. And sure enough, there she was, standing near the catering table, drink in hand, hair pinned perfectly. She wore the same brand of smile I remembered from years ago, polished, poised, hollow. She hadn't seen me yet. I didn't rush over. Instead, I introduced Leah to a few people, chatted with the executive director, and reviewed the next steps on a local housing development plan we were backing. It wasn't performative. It was simply who I had become. Solid, focused, present. Eventually, Ava turned and her eyes landed on me. She blinked, and then her smile faltered just slightly. I nodded politely. She made her way over, slow and careful, like someone walking through a dream. "Jonas," she said. "Ava, you came." "I'm on the board," I said evenly. Her eyes darted to Leah, who smiled graciously but said nothing. Ava's gaze lingered, curious, surprised, maybe even threatened before returning to me. "You look well," she said. "I am well," I replied. A pause. Then she took a small breath. "Can we talk? Alone?" I turned to Leah. "You okay for a minute?" "Of course," she said, heading toward the bar. Ava and I stepped just outside onto the balcony. Downtown San Diego shimmered below us. "I didn't expect all this," she admitted, looking around. "I didn't expect to be here either a year ago." She shifted her weight. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I've just become who I used to be, before I got lost in someone else's world." She flinched, just slightly. "I was wrong," she said. I nodded. "You were." "I let the wrong people guide me. I let pride and image ruin what mattered." I didn't disagree. "And now," she added, her voice quiet, "you've built something without me. Something good. That was the plan all along. You just weren't interested in it unless it had your mother's approval." She didn't speak for a moment. "Then, are you and Leah? She's someone who respects me, who sees me, who didn't need me to be anything other than who I am." Ava looked down at the floor tiles. "I miss you." I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of peace. "I think you miss the version of me you thought you could control." She looked up, startled, but I wasn't angry. "I don't hate you, Ava," I said. "I just don't need to keep holding space for someone who was willing to erase me." She looked like she wanted to say something more, something convincing, something persuasive. But there was no more stage to perform on. No audience. Just the two of us and the truth that had long since settled in. "I wish you well," I said. "I really do." She nodded, slowly. "You deserve it." I turned and walked back inside. Leah was laughing at something the bartender had said. I joined her, handed her a glass of wine, and we spent the rest of the night in warm conversation and easy company. As for Ava, she left before dessert. No dramatic exit. No final plea. Just gone. And that was my closure. No confrontation. No revenge plot. Just living well, surrounded by people who choose you not because you shine in a spotlight, but because you stand strong in the dark. That's what real love is. Not conditional. Not performative. Just steady. And that night, I didn't need anyone to validate who I had become. I already knew.